Hidden in the mountains of northern Japan are temples containing some startling holy relics. These mummies were once Buddhist monks who died hundreds of years ago. But they are no ordinary mummies. These priests took themselves to the limits of human endurance. It was part of a religious process that has remained secret. But now, science is revealing the truth. These monks mummified themselves while they were still alive. Frantic modern-day Tokyo is the familiar face of 21st century Japan. But alongside this hectic home of technology and the microchip, there survives an ancient past. While the inhabitants of Tokyo keep religion modern and up to date, there are other places where they try to do just the opposite. Yamagata Province, 200 miles north of Tokyo, is one such place. Here, history seems to have stopped, and ancient beliefs have remained unchanged for centuries. Inside the Buddhist temples built in this inhospitable land is a bizarre mystery. This is Chirenji Temple. It was built 400 years ago, and Kome Sato is the current chief priest. He is the guardian of a unique and sacred relic.
This is the Buddhist mummy of Tetsumonkai. He has been here for over 170 years, since he finished the process of mummifying himself. We believe that, despite his physical condition, his soul is still present here, and that it is a powerful force for the local people.
Tetsumonkai's mummified body is extremely well preserved. Muscles and tendons can be seen on his face and hands. His body is still covered with mummified skin. According to folklore, as a young man, he was extremely handsome and very popular with the ladies.
When the former chief priest of this temple brought me here for the first time, I had a strange feeling. Sitting in front of Tetsumonkai, it didn't feel like I was watching a dead man. Instead, I felt that he was watching me.
Incredibly, Tetsumonkai isn't the only Buddhist to achieve this apparent immortality. "30 miles away from Chirenji, in the port of Sakata, is the only temple in Japan with 2 Buddhist mummies.
This mummy is called Kukai, and he became the first priest here 250 years ago when this temple was rebuilt. Originally, he was a samurai, but he became a priest, and then finally a Buddhist mummy at the age of 58.
促進物になったと言われております。
The second mummy at Kaikoji is named Inyokai, and he died in 1822.
Enyokai became the ninth priest of this temple. During his life, he was a farmer. I think he has a very warm and friendly face.
Only a few miles away is perhaps the best preserved Buddhist mummy of them all. This is Shinyokai, who died in 1783 at the age of 96. Every 12 years, he's removed from his glass case here at Dainichibo Temple and given a change of clothing. Threads from his old robes are then sold as lucky charms to protect his followers.
When we die, we lose our bodies and our souls go to the other world. But Shinyokai has kept his body and soul together, and by being here, he has protected many people. Even today, those who have been helped by him often come back here to express their gratitude.
According to the folklore, all of these priests underwent the same religious practices in their quest to become Buddhist mummies. Remarkably, it wasn't until the early 1960s that this amazing collection of preserved monks came to the attention of Japanese scientists. In 1961, Professor Akira Matsumoto, along with a group of researchers from the University of Tokyo, traveled to Yamagata to conduct a scientific investigation of the mummies.
Many people have been mummified in different places around the world, but I think the Japanese Buddhist mummies are very different. Back in the 1960s, no one in Japan was interested in studying mummies, so we were the first to investigate them scientifically. At the beginning, the priests in charge of the temples told us it is not possible to x-ray the Buddhist mummies. They are too precious and sacred. And they were also worried about us touching the mummies, afraid that this might bring a curse down on the temple.
The scientists reassured the priests that they would work with the utmost care and respect, and so the investigation proceeded. Externally, they noted that some of the mummies had been varnished, but according to the temple records, this had only happened a few years previously, long after the mummification had taken place.
We took off their robes to study the bodies. Most of the mummies were collapsed over and broken. They were falling apart, so we tried to restore them to their original shape as much as we could.
As the scientists continued their examination, they discovered something very puzzling. It was clear that on most of the mummies, the internal organs had not been removed. This was surprising because almost all known mummification techniques begin with the removal of the body's organs. The goal of mummification is the preservation of a dead body against the natural forces of corruption and decomposition. This is no easy task. For the first few hours after death, a corpse remains apparently unchanged. But beneath this peaceful exterior, a riot is about to begin. Flies lay eggs in the soft, moist body tissues. Inside the corpse, the normally benign bacteria in our stomachs and intestines turn from devouring our food to devouring us. While the bacteria eat the corpse from the inside, swarms of newly hatched maggots make quick work of all the remaining flesh. Soon, the entire corpse is riddled with decay, and any chance of preserving the body is lost. The solution to this problem was worked out thousands of years ago by the most famous mummifiers of all, the Egyptians. They prevented decay using elaborate embalming techniques. First, they would remove all the internal organs, the brain, the liver, and the intestines, and then preserve the remaining tissues using a variety of resins, lime, and chemicals. Egyptian embalming methods were very scientifically advanced.
An Egyptian mummy was made by other people after the person had died. Somebody cut out the guts and the brains, but that didn't happen with the Buddhist mummies. They are different. They made a great effort to become mummies on their own.
Professor Matsumoto's investigations of the Buddhist mummies seem to confirm the local folklore. Somehow, these priests had managed to become mummified without going through the normal embalming process. But how exactly did they do it? How can you be embalmed alive? Important clues can be found from the legends surrounding the life of one of the mummies, this man, the monk Tetsu Munkai. Scientific investigations of the Buddhist mummies enshrined in temples in the north of Japan seem to confirm that the bodies were preserved without the help of traditional embalming techniques. How this happened is a mystery, but there are clues from the life of the most recent mummy, Tetsu Munkai, who died in 1829. Today, Tetsu Munkai is dressed in the richly colored robes of a high priest because by the end of his life, he had attained perfect spiritual enlightenment and thus had become the ultimate holy man, a Buddha. But he wasn't always so holy. In the temple, there are a series of paintings depicting the legends of Tetsu Munkai's life. The legends tell how, as a young man, Tetsu Munkai was a simple farm laborer. One day, he was in the fields when he was set upon by two drunken samurai. In feudal Japan, samurai were fearsome warriors who might kill a peasant as easily as look at him. The story says that armed only with his workman's scythe, Tetsu Munkai defended himself against the attack. Having killed his drunken assailants, Tetsu Munkai knew his life was in grave danger. Other samurai would surely seek to avenge their comrades' deaths, and so he fled into the nearby mountains. For many Japanese, these mountains are sacred territory. And it was here that Tetsu Munkai arrived at the gate of the Buddhist temple at Chirenji. Traditionally, Buddhists believe in a cycle of life, death, and reincarnation as the means to a higher spiritual level. This cycle may take thousands of lifetimes before a believer can reach enlightenment and so become a Buddha. But unknown to Tetsumunkai, the priests at Chirenji were different from normal Buddhists. They belonged to a sect of Buddhism known as Shingon. Shingon Buddhists believe that there is a shortcut to enlightenment. Instead of the normal cycle of reincarnation, they believe that if you put your body through extreme suffering, it's possible to become a Buddha, a kind of living saint in the space of your own lifetime. Torturing the body to perfect the mind may seem odd, but not for the followers of the Shingon faith. According to Gaynor Sekimori, an expert on Japanese Buddhism, this all makes complete sense.
Enlightenment is not an intellectual process. Enlightenment is a physical process. Your body itself has to understand something. It's not enough for the mind to understand. You can't divorce one from the other. Both are essential. Both are important.
In the legend of Tetsumunkai, he realized that joining the Shingon priests at Chirenji Temple was the only way to save his life. Just as in Christianity, a church can be a sanctuary, so can a temple in Buddhism.
Normally, if you had a criminal background, you weren't allowed to become a monk. But Tetsumunkai was given special permission by the priest of this temple, and he started studying here.
Safe from the samurai but racked with guilt at having committed murder, Tetsumunkai began to seek spiritual purity through physical punishment.
He started practicing Shingon rituals on one of the nearby mountains. He would climb to the top and back 3 times a day, and in winter he would bathe in the freezing water.
In the Shingon sect, performing such body-toughening rituals was a way of becoming holy. But no one took things as far as Tetsumunkai. According to local legend, his extreme religious beliefs led him to commit what some might call the ultimate sacrifice.
Women were not allowed to enter the temples, but one day a prostitute Tetsumunkai had once known sneaked in to see him.
Disturbed that the woman had interrupted his meditation, Tetsumunkai grabbed her and led her to the back of the temple. There he drew a knife and sliced off his own testicles. The legend says he handed his still warm flesh to the shocked woman and told her to leave and never return. Gradually, over a 20-year period, Tetsumunkai perfected self-denial and spiritual purity, until finally, at age 49, he decided to undertake perhaps the most extreme self-denial ever known. In pursuit of the ultimate enlightenment, he planned to mummify his body while still alive. The final stage of this involved the most extreme hardship. Tetsumunkai had himself entombed alive in an underground pit. He had no food or water, and only a bell with which to signal the outside world.
Inside the pit, there was only enough space for a man to sit cross-legged. Since the tomb was covered and sealed, a bamboo pipe was inserted to allow air in.
Inside his tomb, Tetsumunkai meditated. Once a day, he would ring a bell to signal that he was still alive. For most Western people, Tetsumonkai's suicide method is incomprehensible. But for the Shingon priest, it was merely another obstacle separating him from the ultimate spiritual achievement. Tetsu Munkai believed that at some point in the far future, a great Buddha or living saint would return to Earth in a second coming. This Buddha would require help in enlightening all the people on Earth, and so he would reanimate those beings who had already achieved spiritual purity.
If you believe absolutely firmly that by mummifying yourself, you are at some point going to be brought back into this world at a time when the Buddha returns, this must be such a great stimulation that all of the hardships wouldn't matter at all.
"13 days passed. The bell always rang. But on the 14th day, there was silence. After the bell stopped ringing, the tomb was sealed and left untouched for 1,000 days. When the temple priests finally opened the grave, they found the monk's body intact in death, as he was in life, still seated cross-legged in the lotus position. There was no sign of any putrefaction or decay. Tetsu Munkai had achieved his goal of preserving his body forever. But being entombed alive is not enough to turn a human corpse into a mummy, especially in a damp climate like Japan's. What special knowledge did the priest use to preserve his body? There are clues to rediscovering these secrets. They are contained in the story of one man, the man who invented the bizarre process of self-mummification. The Buddhist mummies have been worshipped as powerful religious icons for hundreds of years. Most people are content just to look at the mummies and say prayers. Few have ever been inspired to follow their example and find a way of preserving their dead bodies. However, for one man, Kishio Oto, a childhood encounter with the mummy of the monk Tetsu Munkai changed his life forever.
My parents brought me to the temple when I was very small. When I saw Tetsu Munkai's Buddhist mummy in the dark, it made me scared. But then I said, I want to be a mummy. I believed that if I became a mummy, I would be a superman, and people would worship me as a god.
Kishio Oto still follows the same strict Shingon teachings that inspired Tetsu Munkai, even down to the ritual clothes that he wears. His parents managed to dissuade him from trying to become a mummy, not least because, today, it's against the law.
Since the late 19th century, it's been illegal to try to become a mummy. It is considered as a suicide, so the supporters of anyone who tries it would be arrested. Unless the law is changed, there will be no more mummies.
The teachings and rituals that Kishio Oto and the mummified priests both followed were brought to this area over 1,000 years ago, but they originated somewhere completely different. 400 miles south of Chirenji is the temple complex of Mount Koya. This is the birthplace of the Shingon religion. It is one of the holiest places in Japan, a sort of Vatican for Buddhists. The main temple here contains over 11,000 lanterns. The most important light of all is this small flame. This lamp has been kept burning continuously from generation to generation for over 1,000 years. But the lights aren't the only thing around here thought to be eternal. These priests are conducting their daily ritual. They're taking a meal to a holy man named Kukai, who they believe lives in this temple. Kukai died over 1,000 years ago, yet his followers are convinced that he's alive to this day and living in the mausoleum behind these gates.
For a believer, Kukai is alive. He's alive in some incomprehensible way that we couldn't possibly begin to understand, but he's alive.
The only concrete evidence in the temple of Kukai's existence is this statue, and stories that tell how he traveled through China over 1,000 years ago, studying Buddhist practices. When he returned to Japan, he used his newfound knowledge to lay down the principles of the Shingon sect and dedicate the temple at Koya.
I think Kukai was a genius. He had engineering skills. He's credited for building reservoirs and bridges. He was a master at calligraphy, a wonderful poet. He was, of course, a great religious teacher. He is one of the greatest people that Japan has ever produced.
It was here at Koya that Kukai came up with the program that, hundreds of years later, would allow Tetsu Munkai and the other Buddhist monks to start to mummify their bodies while they were still alive. He devised a two-stage program that took up to a decade to complete and was definitely not for the faint-hearted.
To prepare the body so that it mummifies well after death, you need to get rid of as much flesh as possible, as this is the part most likely to putrefy. Therefore, the first stage of Kukai's program calls for a strict diet, giving up rice, wheat, soya, sesame, and azuki beans, the 5 main cereals of our diet.
Instead of nourishing food, the monks were only allowed to eat nuts and seeds found in the forest. A monk following the first stage of the program would live on this meager diet for 1,000 days. During this time, he would also subject his body to exhausting physical trials on the mountain. After 3 years of this, the practitioner is ready to move on to the second 1,000-day stage of the program.
The second stage involves even more severe fasting. The only thing a practitioner is now allowed to eat is a small amount of the bark and roots of pine trees.
It was because of this unusual diet that Kukai's program was given the name Mokojikigyu, the practice of tree eating.
These trees have lived for hundreds of years, and by eating their bark and the roots, we get a special energy from them. The pine bark and sap taste bitter, but we don't treat it as food. We think of it as something more like medicine.
At this stage, the monks stop exercising and change their activities to chanting and meditating. By starving their bodies, they are preparing their minds.
If you don't eat very much, your concentration is improved and your senses sharpened. You can feel the energy of a sacred area, and this helps you be united with the universe.
Underlying most religious principles and practices is a sense of there's a transcendent world that is other than the world we live in. And fasting And starvation in a combination with prayer would help one to move beyond the ordinary world that we live in and make contact with or reach a transcendent world. And I would absolutely buy that these people were perceived as holy individuals.
On the surface, Kukai's tree-eating diet seems like further punishment and self-denial. But could it also hold the key to their perfect mummification? After living on little more than pine needles, tree sap, and bark for almost 6 years, these Buddhist monks had reduced themselves to living skeletons.
By now, when Enyokai got in the water to bathe, his body was so light that it would only float on the surface. His helpers had to push him under the water. At this point, the priest knew that his body had lost all the fat, and so it was time for him to go into his underground tomb.
Losing weight was a crucial part of a monk's plan. But what effect did this have on the mummification of their bodies? Chronic starvation is a common human experience, yet its precise effect on the body has only recently been understood. The terrible circumstances of the Second World War led researchers to carry out some of the most original and controversial work in this field. At the University of Minnesota, conscientious objectors to the war volunteered to lose 25% of their body weight over 6 months.
The Minnesota semi-starvation study was carried out and supported by the U.S. Quartermaster Corps and the United States government in order to learn what the consequences physiologically are of starvation.
The experiment wasn't just being done for academic interest. There was a vital need for research on how best to refeed starved concentration camp victims. One of the volunteers was 23-year-old Henry Schulberg.
When I volunteered to be in the semi-starvation experiment, all I knew was that I was going to be hungry, and I had no idea of the full extent of it. That had to wait.
After being fed normally for 6 weeks, the volunteers suddenly had their diet cut from 3,200 calories a day down to 1,600.
At first it was sort of an adventure, but then soon it became obvious that we were starting to feel the hunger. And it wasn't until we were into it for about a month or so that we really started to feel the effects of it. One curious thing was that our fingernails got softer. That's kind of one of those things you notice, and now it's nice, sharp, steady fingernails. Our hearing got better, strangely enough, because I understand that the eardrum or the muscles around there relaxed, and we were able to hear better.
But as time went on, the volunteers underwent more serious changes.
There was a rapid weight loss, and about 1/3 to 1/4 of the weight loss was due to the body cannibalizing its own soft tissues, muscle and liver. So there's actually a thinning out of all organs. The skin, for example, becomes quite thin and brittle. The heart shrinks, the liver, and skeletal muscle atrophies or wastes away.
The physiological changes discovered in this controversial research turn out to be a key part of Kukai's program.
One of the most important aspects of the Japanese mummification is the elimination of cereal grains, which would reduce the starch carbohydrate intake and naturally result in a reduction of fat.
Body fat has a high moisture content, so by eliminating it, the body becomes drier and is more likely to preserve well. This is the reason that Buddhist monks starved themselves over an extended period. If they had simply stopped eating altogether, they would have died quickly, but with too much moisture left in their tissues.
A starved corpse preserves more readily than a corpulent individual. Therefore, by starving themselves for essentially a 6-year period plus, they are making their bodies prime candidates for maximum preservation.
But why eat trees, and why pine in particular?
The whole issue of pine is interesting. We know that we make shellac and varnishes and other preserving products from pine resin. So there must be something that helped mummify and leatherize their skins and maybe the lining of their stomachs. I think one has to see this as occurring after hundreds of years of experimenting with different vegetable products that they settled on pine. I don't think it's accidental.
Kukai's program, seemingly just a religious ritual, has a sound scientific and physiological basis. In the wealthy, developed world, few of us ever experience extreme hunger, and the normal perception of such deprivation is that it is a painful experience. But for those who have been through starvation, the overpowering feeling is very different.
I know people talk about hunger pain, and I don't recall physical pain. Our pain was just one of fatigue.
A person starving themselves, such as these Buddhist monks, wouldn't experience any pain in any particular system of the body, perhaps except for their stomach feeling deprived and irritated. It's more a mental anguish.
Living with constant hunger, year after year, the psychological strain on the monks was enormous.
Tetsumonkai knew there was always the possibility that at some point the practice would be too hard for him, so he always carried a knife and a rope. If he weakened and broke the practice even for one day, he had vowed to kill himself.
How did these starving monks find the will to endure this mental torture?
One of the things that the Buddhists were doing while they were starving themselves in this very special way is that they were meditating. And I think that would have the additional role of slowing down their metabolism, reducing their caloric requirements, decreasing their energy requirements. I think notions of pain as we conceptualize it would probably not be present at all.
Sitting motionless, meditating for long periods also causes the muscles to wither away, reducing still further the amount of flesh on the monks' bodies. But the principal causes of decay after death are bacteria and maggots. How could Kukai's program reach beyond the grave and protect the monks' bodies even after they were dead? In the final days leading up to their internment in the underground tomb, Kukai's program instructed the monks to consume another tree product. This time, a tea made from the sap of the urushi tree. Urushi sap is highly prized in Japan. It is used to make the lacquer with which the Japanese decorate bowls and utensils. But this sap can also produce a powerful allergic reaction. This craftswoman has a natural immunity to the poison, but most people do not.
Urushi can be very poisonous. If you are sensitive to it, just walking near the tree will give you a rash on your face or neck. It will be very itchy and terribly uncomfortable. It might even spread all over the body, and you will have a serious problem.
Unpleasant though it may seem, drinking a tea from urushi greatly increases the chances of preventing the body from decaying. First, the poisonous tea would induce vomiting, sweating, and urinating, ridding the maximum amount of moisture from the priests' bodies in their last days. But even more significant was the effect the urushi would have after the priests were dead.
Normally, when we die, our bodies will be eaten by maggots, leaving only the bones. But this didn't happen for the Buddhist mummies. Their skin, flesh, organs, and brains are all preserved. This is the result of Kukai's ascetic practice, and particularly because the monks drank a tea made from the urushi sap. This tea kills any maggots that try and feed on the body after death.
Reducing their flesh and drinking preservatives undoubtedly moved their bodies closer to mummification. But the monks still had one final challenge if they were to achieve their goal of perfect preservation. Inside all our bodies, even a starved body, are the germs that will begin the irreversible process of decay. Somehow, the monks had to stop these bacteria in their tracks. And how they did it shows just how sophisticated and scientific Kukai's 1,000-year-old program really was. Local legend has it that buried at unmarked spots in the hills around Chirenji Temple lie several tombs containing the remains of monks who tried unsuccessfully to mummify themselves. These monks put themselves through years of torturous rituals and extreme fasting. They even went through the unimaginable horror of being interred alive. But still, after all this, they failed to become mummies. Why were some priests successful in mummifying themselves and others not?
After the priests went into the tomb in the ground, their bodies were left alone there for about 3 years. People didn't know whether they would rot or become mummified.
Buddhists in this sect might say that it was to do with their spiritual strength. But perhaps it's also about the bacteria in their digestive system.
There are bacteria in the gut that contribute to putrefaction, so that to mummify or for a corpse to truly mummify, somehow all of that activity has to be stopped.
The natural bacteria in the human gut are one of the principal causes of post-mortem decay. Did Kukai's self-mummification program have a way of stopping these bacteria? Over 1,000 years ago, when Kukai came to the mountains in Yamagata, one of the things he was drawn to were the natural hot springs in the area. There are hot springs like this one all over Japan, and for contemporary Japanese, they provide a means to health and relaxation. But 1,000 years ago, Kukai found a much different use for them. According to the folklore around the Buddhist mummies, during their last days on Kukai's mummification regime, they would often worship at a spring, which they considered sacred, in the hills above Chirenji Temple.
We know from our religious teachings that there is a spiritual presence around the rock where the water from the Yudono spring originates.
To followers of Shingon Buddhism, this particular spring is so sacred that today no filming is allowed there. However, this footage from the early 1960s shows the giant rock which the spring water flows over. Over centuries, the spring water has deposited thick crusts of minerals, and the holy water from the spring is bottled and sold in local temples.
The spring water contains a lot of minerals. Since the old days, people have been drinking it as medicine as it had a healing power. It was believed to give you a long life too.
It is also known that people used to eat the mineral deposit as a medicine, so it is probable that the Buddhist priests practicing to become mummies also ate the minerals to become Buddhas.
This is a sample of the minerals deposited by the spring. When it was analyzed, this powder was found to contain something very unusual, something not at all conducive to a long, healthy life. The Udono spring contains a deadly concentration of arsenic. Many of the hot springs in the northern part of Japan contain very low levels of arsenic, and laws in this part of the country expressly forbid the use of spring water for agriculture. But the Udono spring is different. A spoonful of the mineral deposits from this spring contains enough arsenic to kill a man. By eating the salts and drinking the water, the Buddhist priests might well have been ensuring that, when they went into their underground tomb, death was certain. What's more, for the completion of their attempt to become mummies, the arsenic was crucial.
Arsenic is a toxic substance that is not eliminated from the body but is stored in the tissues and causes damage to most of the body organs. However, after death, it may help preserve the body by being toxic to microorganisms which ordinarily would decay the body.
Arsenic is also a preservative that was used as part of the embalming process 2 centuries ago. So presumably, perhaps this too could have contributed to the internal mummification of these individuals.
This was the final ingenious part of Kukai's mummification program. The deadly arsenic was a masterstroke. It would not only kill the bacteria which causes decomposition, but also act as a preservative on all the other tissues. In the strange world of self-mummification, a medicine which is really a deadly toxin was just what was needed. The scientific revelations about how these unique mummies were created does not detract from their importance to the Buddhist faith and the inspiration they give its followers.
For 1200 years, the Buddhist mummies have been important because they are the embodiment of the spirituality of local people. In modern times, when everyone is selfish, someone like Tetsumonkai makes a very deep impression on us.
Whether Kukai devised his torturous regime by experiment or accident, we will never know. But thanks to his amazing scientific insights, 4 of the strangest mummies in the world live on to inspire and amaze us. And so perhaps their search for immortality has in the end been successful.